Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That's right. We're talking about The Whole 9 Yards. The Whole 9 Yards, released in 2000, directed by Jonathan Lynn, follows Matthew Perry's character as a dentist when Bruce Willis's character moves in next to him, a contracted hitman, and what happens after that. Let's just jump right into the 10 essential aspects of a movie. First is plot. Does the movie follow a comprehensive story arc and is plausible within the world that has been created? Yeah, I like the plot of this movie. It's very fun and it has a couple twists in it. That's something I enjoyed, was that throughout the movie, you kind of never knew what was going to happen next. It helps with the story, helps keep you into the movie for as long as it is. They did a good job. Second is attraction. Does the movie have an interesting premise with a high entertainment value? Yeah, I really like the premise of this movie. I think the idea of Matthew Perry, just a regular guy, having to deal with the fact that a high contract killer has moved in next door, was funny. I think they did a good job of using the story that is normally a serious subject and turning it into comedy. Third is theme. What message or truth is a movie trying to convey? I don't really think there was a message or truth that was being conveyed here. If anything, it may have been that being true to yourself and being honest might get you good places. Fourth is dialogue. Is there a real feel to the conversations? Now, this is really important in a comedy movie. You've got to have good dialogue. You got to have good writing. I think they had some pretty good writing here. They did a good job of blending two types of comedy, which is a clever comedy that comes with the writing and a physical comedy that comes with the acting. But as far as the writing, I thought they had a couple conversations in this movie that were really funny. Now, fifth is acting. Are the characters convincing? This is where I think Matthew Perry really stole the show. He really makes this movie here. He's just funny. He has a lot of physical aspects to this movie that are really funny. A lot of his facial expressions and reactions are just really good. Everybody else in this film does a good job as well. They're pretty funny. But I just think Matthew Perry really stole the show. He just did a really good job. Six is cinematography. Is there creative use of lighting, setting, and wardrobe to convey emotion? I mean, not really. There's nothing cinematic about this movie, really. It just does its job as a comedy movie. It's funny. It doesn't need to really show any sort of emotion in a clever way. It just needed to be funny, and it was. Seventh is editing. This is all about the pace of the movie. Now, the movie is about an hour and 41 minutes. It's a good amount of time. A comedy really shouldn't be that long unless the story is really in-depth. This story got a little in-depth, but it lengthened it just the amount it needed to close it in. I like the time of this movie. Eighth is soundtrack. I mean, it doesn't really need a soundtrack. Didn't really have a soundtrack. It was fine. Ninth is directing. Directing is kind of the collection of the previous 8 sections. I feel like a director is in charge of all those, has to put them together to make a good movie. Now, Jonathan Lynn had directed 8 movies before this one. He had directed Clue, Nuns on the Run, My Cousin Vinny, The Distinguished Gentleman, Greedy, Sergeant Bilko, Trial and Error, and then The Whole 9 Yards. I haven't seen a lot of those, but based on a couple of them that I have seen, I think it's on par. I think he's a good director. I think his experience had really come into play here. It was a movie that was funny. That's all it needed to be. But it was also interesting, which helped. The story unraveled as it went along and kept you interested. I enjoyed that a lot. I felt like the actors had a good time making this film. It seemed like they had a lot of comedic freedom, which I feel is when they're at their best. So I give him praise for this movie. I think it was really well directed. 10th is time. Does it stand the test of time? Now, from the making of this video, it is 24 years old, and I absolutely think it has stood the test of time. It's funny. Even 24 years later, it's funny. One thing about comedic films is they will easily stand the test of time if you just have good writing with a decent story, and that's what this does. Now for the review section. Rotten Tomatoes critics gives it a 43. The audience gives it a 64, and IMDb gives it a 67. I can somewhat understand why critics give it such a low score. Comedy is just kind of a personal thing. It has to hit you right, and personally, it hit me right. It was funny. I thought the writing was really well done. I feel like some critics are maybe too serious, and they don't understand a certain style of comedy. But I did. I really enjoyed it. I would probably even give it higher than the other two. I'd probably give it in the mid 70s or low 70s. I thought it was really well written, but the story was also interesting. It has a couple turns. It has a good premise to make a foundation on. I thought it was great. Now for the rankings. For 2000, it's going to be first in both categories as it's the only movie I reviewed in that year. For the decade of the 2000s, it's going to be first above No Country for Old Men and The Mist. This movie is made for entertainment. The other two were not. This movie is much easier to pick up and watch casually. It's funny. It does a good job. It's just more entertaining. For cinematography, it's going to be third. Again, it's just not meant for it. The other two movies are more intense. They have better acting. They're longer. I feel like they represent film better as an art than this movie does. Now for all time, on entertainment side, it's going number one. It's beating out Toy Story. It's going to be on the top of the list. Toy Story is a good movie, but it does have its faults. It's entertaining. I feel like I've reviewed a lot of somewhat intense movies lately, so this is the first movie that I feel was just made to entertain, and it's going to stay on top because that's exactly what it did. Now for cinematography, it's going to be fifth, just below The Mist and above The Ministry for Ungentlemanly Warfare. The reason I put it above Ungentlemanly Warfare is just I feel as though it is a better representation of film because it fulfilled its purpose better. No, it is not diving into human emotion and not as artistic, but it does what it was supposed to do, which is be funny and be entertaining. I feel like Ungentlemanly Warfare was not entertaining nor cinematic, so it just beats it out by doing what it was supposed to do. That's all I've got for the whole 9 yards. If you haven't watched it, you should check it out. Otherwise, comment what movie I should do next. I'm Mr. Majoritarian. Stay classy, San Diego.